I want to start with just opening it up to all of you and ask what your questions are. We can do it kind of like Ask Me Anything style, and then if there are other topics too you want to talk about, go for it. Anyone have like initial questions about going to college and dealing with these issues? Yeah.
Are you supposed to sit next to back?
That is such a good question. So, it's kind of up to you. There's not necessarily a supposed to. On one hand, you can. If you're comfortable with standing, if it's a lecture of 200 people and you're comfortable standing up and saying, hey, like, what you just said wasn't fair. What you just said wasn't appropriate. Might not even have to do with the subject matter that the class is about, you can say that. But if you're worried either about your grade or about your peers or just, speaking in front of 200 people can be a little nerve-wracking, it's totally okay to not. Other options would be, depending on the state, you can record, but some states have certain laws about how you can record if you need permission from other people, so be careful about that. But you can go to office hours after class, try to talk to the professor one-on-one if that's also uncomfortable, specifically if you think it could affect your grade, which there have been cases where it's happened and it's nerve-wracking when you're in college and your grades count. You can always go to the dean's office and go through administration levels. It's an option. It can also turn into a legal matter depending on how you want to approach the situation, but the onus is really on you, and reaching out to an organization like Stand With Us and other organizations that help on campus is also a great option just to work through the exact situation you're going through.
You got to answer the question.
Yeah.
Honestly, to open the floor, has anyone ever experienced anti-Semitism on campus or in classroom? Because I haven't. I'm in Brooklyn College. I'm fortunate enough never to experience it, but curious to hear any of you have.
I'm in high school. I've experienced it with a group of friends who decided it would be funny to draw swastikas somewhere.
That's horrible. I'm so sorry that you had that experience.
Oh, they're not my friends anymore, so.
Yeah, makes sense. That's really horrible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Have other people had similar experiences? You don't have to share, obviously.
I got a question. Just to piggyback off what Rachel was saying.
Yeah.
If somebody, let's say, is more dominant, let's say there's 10, 15 people going and burning an Israeli flag in the park. Should you even attempt to do anything if you're one person, or at that point they're just so convinced that there's nothing you can do?
First of all, if someone is burning an Israeli flag in the park, they probably don't have a right to be doing that. So calling the cops or campus police is not out of the question, just because, you need permits, / probably can't even get a permit to do something like that. So first of all, that would be step number one. Step number two, say, Students for Justice in Palestine, a campus organization that is extremely anti-Israel, is set up on campus, burning an Israeli flag, or even just tabling or anything like that. Approaching someone like that, going up to them and going, hey, you're wrong. Everything you think is wrong. Or I'm a Zionist and I believe Israel has a right to exist because of so many reasons and because of my identity. That's amazing, and kudos to you if you want to do that. They probably won't care, unfortunately, and it probably won't have a huge impact. The only reason to do it would be if there's a crowd of other people there, right? Because say, SJP is doing something, Students for Justice in Palestine is doing something, and they're a whole crowd of random people are coming who don't know anything about the conflict, don't have anything to do with Israel or Palestine or anything in between, then that's an opportunity. Thank you. That's an opportunity for you to make an impact, because suddenly you're going to be able to show other people that there is another side to the story. It's not just, oh, Israel is terrible. Actually, Israel's a part of who I am and a part of my identity, and here's why. And, explaining the other side. So, yes and no. I hate to play the in-between, but there's always gray space with these answers. It's really, based on the situation and based on how confident you are as well. You know, if you're ready to fight back and have that conversation and try and create a space for dialogue, do it, 100%, not even a question.
But let's say you're not acknowledged enough, like, should you even attempt to say something, or you should just, like let's say you and me have an argument, so what are you fighting up against? You know, like, they're gonna probably attack you, so you'll stay back, or you just not do anything?
Yeah, so we have a little rule at Stimulus. We call it the 10-80-10. Other organizations use similar tactics. And it's the idea that 10% of people in the world are pro-Israel, right? At the end of the day, you could have any conversation with them, probably many of you in this room, and you're going to leave that conversation being like, but I still support Israel's existence. And then there's 10% of people who are anti-Israel. No matter what you say to them, they're going to leave that conversation still not believing that Israel should exist, and maybe thinking horrible things about Israel as well. And then there's 80% of people who, you know, don't really know much or feel connected to the matter at hand, which is super fair because, you know, you can only care about so many things in the world. And those are the people that you do want to engage with. So if those people are surrounding the anti-Israel crowd, it could be worth it. But if those people aren't really around, not that you necessarily know, but probably be able to tell based on how they're interacting with the SJP members, then you can, you know, decide if it's really worth approaching the table or approaching the anti-Israel people and having that conversation. Now, the only other time that it is worth still having that conversation is if you want the experience, which is never a bad idea either. You can go up to people who completely disagree with you and learn from them. The only problem is if they're going to, you know, turn it violent or attack you mentally or physically. So there's a fine line there. Having backup is never a bad idea. And in a situation like that, you know, you can always pull out your phone and say, hi, I'm recording. Because then they probably won't do anything too crazy. Yeah. Did I kind of help? A little bit. It's a lot to process, I know. Have any of you had conversations with friends of yours or with other people who have really fought back against like being pro-Israel and things like that? Yeah? How's that gone?
I realized halfway through that I knew they weren't really going to waver because they were putting that under 10%, and I knew I wasn't going to waver. So I was like, this is a really stupid argument. Like, why are we even talking about this? If I know I'm not convincing you, and I know you're not convincing me, might as well just like drop it so I don't get any worse.
Yeah.
I don't think I'll be saying something to convince them to be pro-Israel because I would be so upset because like, I want to make myself make my point even though it's not good for me.
Right.
I'm not trying to convince them to be pro-Israel.
Right. So then,
a lot of times it like plays into my emotions too, because like I'm emotionally connected to the matter at hand. It's like I'll fight, I'll do anything I can, but at the end of the day, I only know so many arguments, and they're always going to shut it down. So like,
right.
there's not much I can do. Anything.
No, it's true, and it's unfortunate. I think it's really sad. It's the polarization of the world that we live in today in reality. But something that you also have to think about in the situation is yourself. Like, you always are going to come first because you can only be in control of who you are and what you stand for and yourself. And even if you are just, you know, the biggest Zionist and you want to share that with everyone, I mean, do it. Like, I support you in that. But if your mental health needs to come first, or if you need to just think about your personal safety, that's more important. Yeah.
So if I'm a student on campus and I feel like I don't know anything and I want to do something at some time, what's the best way you would suggest the student to learn? Where should they go to, and like what are some good resources?
Well, first of all, Stand With Us is definitely a resource for you no matter what campus you end up on. Also, we're a resource for you in high school now, or in college, or after college, or anytime. Our website also, actually, these booklets that you have, we have these booklets in PDF form on our website with like hundreds of other booklets that go into other topics. So that might be a good starting place, just if you want like one place to go to. But then just in terms of like general knowledge, I mean, getting involved with say like Hillel works with like 1,000 different Israel organizations that all do different work. Some bring you to Israel to learn on the ground. Some teach you here, like Stand With Us. We have conferences to do things like that. And also, I know this is like, Google. But Google, it's interesting because you can really learn different perspectives. And even if you know how you feel about Israel and how you feel about the conflict and how you feel about the Jewish people and all of these amazing things, that's great, but you need to know how other people feel too. And so Googling Israel and just looking at news articles and keeping up with current events, that can be extremely helpful. And this is also maybe boring to some of you, but maybe some of you really enjoy reading. There are so many amazing books across the political spectrum, across the belief system that talk about Israel. I'm actually currently listening to an audiobook that is called Catch 67, you can look it up, and it talks about Israelis and Palestinians and the conflict and everything like that. So, there's thousands of books out there. I highly recommend. If you can go to Israel. How many of you have been to Israel? A lot of you. Okay, all of you. Perfect. Love that. I had the feeling. But going to Israel and really doing like in-depth strategic tours of the region, not just your like classic birthright trip where you see like the sites that are really fun, but really like going to the Gaza border, going maybe even into the West Bank, things like this, it can be really eye-opening and can help you have those conversations on campus because you can say, hey, I first-hand experience. I saw this. Like I have a picture here. That can be great. Yeah.
So you mentioned like to Google stuff and things like that, but I feel like a lot of what the media shows is like very different than what the Israeli media shows. And like let's say I think for example probably a majority of spots in Israel that Arabs and Israelis probably live peacefully together. But like that's not majority, but like in a lot of areas that is how it is, and like the Arabs and the Jews do business together and like they just live together and they coexist, but that's not what's shown like ever.
So true.
So how do you now like bring about an argument with no backup, because that's just not what the media is showing.
That's the worst part about the media today, right? The biases that exist. It's so hard to say, well, they're wrong or they're not showing the whole picture, but that is the argument. And it's the truth also. I mean, first of all, when you're talking to classmates or to teachers or to anyone, like, never lie. If you don't know the answer, don't say an answer. Like, just say, I don't know. I'd love to look that up and get back to you. But tell the truth and be genuine, because in doing that, you're going to gain so much respect from the other person. So if you say, look, the media is not showing the whole picture, and there are biases. I mean, like, the person you're talking to can't deny that. Like, and if they do, then they're just living in a false reality. So like, there's only so much you can do, of course, but especially if you can show, there are some really great media people, sure, out there who, both on social media and in the news, that do tell the right story, or do tell another story, right? It's not even that there's a right story, but there's so many different narratives at play here, and conflicting national narratives and everything in between. So if you can look up Bassem Aid. He's an Arab Israeli who talks about kind of more being in support of Israel than most Arab Israelis in the media talk about. So it's interesting, you can like find these niche people who really do get into that. So yeah.
Going off that, I watch videos on Uri Rochman and PragerU. They're very informative. They break it down and they give you the details you need, to speak back.
That too. Love that.
No, they're great.
Yeah.
PragerU if you're beginners.
Check it out. Other last minute question? Yeah.
It's not really a question, but like when everything was like extra, like a couple months ago.
Yeah.
So like what really upset me was all the influencers who are Jewish, they're just like staying quiet or just saying that like, oh, I see both sides, but like you grew up in a Jewish community. It's not like how you left and you're very much Jewish. So like I just like I DM'd one of them, like a very long thing, just saying that like I understand that like you need to protect yourself, but like you also need to know that like where you came from. And it's upsetting because I know you need to be equal to both sides, but like you also can't in a way because you're upsetting a lot more people than you think, and this is your job to to do, like stick up for us now, just whatever at home. And like she answered me and we had like a very good conversation about it. And then I just think like it's also important like before like when you talk to someone about it, just be understanding to there also before you just argue it. Just like say I get where you're coming from, but it's also this is the other side too. Don't just attack back. Like I feel like if you're just attacking, they're gonna attack you back, and then they're gonna wait for you to stutter or you to say one thing, and then that's it. Like you lost argument.
Yeah, no, you're so right. You're 1,000% right. That's why, this isn't our topic, but that's why, you know, as much as you can be activists for your community and for your beliefs, that's why it's so important. Because, you know, the more people who show support for our beliefs and our side and everything like that, the more that we're able to make that impact and change the narrative and change the mainstream. I think we're running low on time. Not sure. Maybe not.
Go find out.
Go walk in.
Any other last minute thoughts?
Is there anything we can do about those social media posts? Is there anything happening on an institutional level or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, reporting them is always a good idea, right? If something, there's misinformation and there's disinformation. Misinformation is uninformed people saying uninformed things, not out of malice, just because they don't know. That's one thing. Maybe you can engage with those people. But disinformation is when these influencers are either not saying anything or
State the last question.
perfect, or are saying the wrong thing or incorrect things out of malice and out of harm, and they're doing it with the intent of knowing the intent. So when there is disinformation, right? Say when Rashida Tlaib tweets something, flagging it on Twitter or flagging it on Instagram, you know.
What does that do then?
It goes to the social media companies, and then on the upper levels, you have some of these large nonprofits trying to engage with the heads, and there's only so much we can do with the internet. The internet is a dark place sometimes, and it's really sad. But the other thing you can do is, again, promoting stuff that is truthful and trying to really get that narrative out there. And trying to show it to your friends who would normally not. That's another huge thing, you know? So many people look at this situation and they're like, oh gosh, like, stay away. I don't want to do anything with this. Right? How many of you even feel that way sometimes? You're just like, I can't talk about that. Because I feel that way half the time, and this is my job. But it's like so important that we are doing this and that we're having these conversations and that we bring in our communities, even the non-Jewish community, even the non-Zionist community. So I'll leave you with that thought.